Good morning. My name's David Belvin. I'm Managing Director of Clements Hall Cummings, CHC to our friends, and it is my very great pleasure this morning to introduce Daniel Sansel from MWA Financial. Some of you will know and others won't know, so this may be a bit of news, but back in end of September, early October last year, we actually moved our wealth management operations, CHC Wealth Management Limited, to MWA. Our view was that Neil, not a dissimilar age to me, and we were thinking, how can we best look after our clients, make sure that if anything happened to Neil, we could continue to look after our clients. And we had decided a while back that we needed to find an organisation to partner with to enable a smooth transfer for that. So Neil's now working with MWA, but hopefully the service for all of our clients at CHC is not very different to what it was before. Neil's still there, Malcolm's still there, but MWA are looking after, supervising and running the business now. And Daniel heads the advice across the team. So Daniel today is going to talk to us about pensions and some protection issues that we think everybody needs to know. So without any further ado, I shall hand over now to Daniel just to take us through a few things we need to think about. And then this is being recorded. So if you want to go back to any points, you can go back on the website and view on demand from tomorrow. And also we'll have a question and answer session. So if you've got some questions, please put them in the chat box, and then at the end of our presentation, or Daniel's presentation, I'll no doubt have a couple of questions I want to tease out from him. And if we've got questions from your good selves, then I can ask those as well. Okay, Daniel, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, David. Hello, everyone. It's very weird. I'm looking at a picture of my own face at the moment. So, yeah, as David said, I'm the head of advice for MWA Financial. I'm a chartered financial planner and a pension transfer specialist. And hopefully some of today, the things we cover you'll be aware of, but it'll just be sort of a reinforcement, and other bits may or may not be new to you. But without wishing to teach anyone how to suck eggs, we'll start at the beginning and then work through in a kind of a discussion of pensions and why they are an important part of financial planning, and why, if you're not considering them, then it's certainly something that we would like to speak to you about. So I'm sure you can all read, but effectively, we'll start with what is a pension. It is just a state-sponsored tax shelter. So as we all know, there's nothing unusual about it, and it allows you to save for the future. And as one of my clients said when he was first getting his head around it, so this is me putting money, me paying myself less now so I can pay myself more in the future when I retire. And that's basically what it is. It's just a way of deferring tax on income now, and then taking that income more flexibly when you've retired. So so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what a pension is. They're not all created equal, some of which we'll touch on later. But so that's the start. And then moving on to the next slide. So big question: why should you invest in a pension? Why would you put money, take it out of your business or out of your bank account and put it in a pension? Well, the first point is that pensions grow tax efficiently. The next point is that you get tax relief on your contributions. So it's a tax efficient way to take money either from your business, or a tax efficient way to take money from your bank account and save it for the future. And then finally, there are estate planning opportunities, and we'll go through all these in a second. But pensions, the rules have changed a lot, but they are good for planning, inheritance tax planning. So tax efficient growth. Any money held in a pension, as I said, it is a tax shelter, much like an ISA. So There's no additional tax payable on any income generated. So if you have that money outside a pension, you may pay tax on income at 20, 40, 45%. None of the dividends received are subject to tax. So again, dividends, as you may or may not be aware, tax rates have risen this April. So those are the current low, high and additional rate tax rates for dividends. And there's also no capital gains. So we've got, the reason there's kind of ors there is if you have, and a typo, I do apologise. If you have property, then you pay capital gains tax at 18 or 28%. And if you just have standard investments, then it's 10 or 20%. And any disposals within a pension, none of those taxes will apply. So tax efficient growth. And then next one is tax relief on contributions. And this is probably the biggest area that most people will think of when they think about making pension contributions. And it's that if you make personal contributions, and you're a basic rate taxpayer, if you put £100 in, then the government grosses that up. They add in the basic rate tax relief, so you get another £25 going in, and then the higher rate your rate of marginal tax, the more the saving. So someone who is paying £100 in as a higher rate taxpayer, they get £166 credited, and if they happen to be an additional rate taxpayer, then it goes up to 181. So that is as close as you can get to free money from the government, because there's no initial additional investment risk. It is just tax relief on contributions. Now, I will touch on this bit here. Pensions, when you take money out of them, are not free from tax. So the first 25%, as people often, it gets talked about, is tax-free. Anything else is subject to basic rates or higher rates or additional rates of tax relief, of income tax, depending on how much you earn. But in the example of someone who puts £80 in, that then gets grossed up to £100. If they're then a basic rate taxpayer, when they take the money out, they still get £85 out. So that £80 that they put in still becomes £85 without them having to take any more risk, even if they actually just left it in there in cash. There is still a tax benefit, and that tax benefit widens if people are able to, massage their tax position. So in an ideal world, someone's an additional rate taxpayer or higher rate taxpayer when they pay into the pension, and then they're a basic rate or maybe even a nil rate taxpayer when they take some of that money out. Okay, so that's kind of, hopefully the basics on tax relief on personal contributions. And then the other one is for some of you, if you're clients of CHC on the accounting side, you may well run your own businesses. And I thought it'd be quite good to just look at a kind of a worked example of how using pensions is and just affecting the way that you take the money from the business actually varies the amount that you can get out of the business, net in your hands when all is said and done. So in this case, there's £100,000 in the business, and in the first column we've got salary only, and we'll look at how that £100,000, how much money someone ends up with at the end. So they've the business has to pay £13,680 of national insurance. So that leaves the salary element at £86,000 and a bit. Then they have to pay income tax of just under £22,000, their employee national insurance. So the net amount in their bank at the end of that is just under £58,000. If they did nothing and they just put all that £100,000 in as a pension contribution, then there's £100,000 in their pension. And if they're a basic rate taxpayer, then they will end up with £85,000. Now, obviously, they'd have to stagger that over sort of 2 or 3 years, but they could have £85,000 of that 100 in their bank. Someone who does a combination of salary and dividend, which is what most people who run their own business do, because they have that flexibility, I won't read out all the numbers, but you can see they have to pay some corporation tax because the dividend element is going to be subject to corporation tax. They will take some salary, they will pay some income tax, and the net amount that they will end up with is just under £70,000. And then someone who does a combination of the three, so makes a pension contribution of £40,000, takes the same salary, and then does the balance of dividends, they're going to end up with £87,000 sort of net income and £40,000 in the pension included within that. And if they were a basic rate taxpayer withdrawing that pension money, then they end up with just over £81,100 in their bank. So hopefully that demonstrates that just by considering pension contributions, the net benefit to the individual is increased compared to just taking the money out as salary or salary and dividends. Now, we have to remember that you cannot access a pension currently until you're 55, and that age is creeping up in line with increases in the state pension age. So it's quite different, a 40-year-old doing this, because they are looking that money away for the long term, compared to someone who is already over 55 who actually could take the money from the pension if they need it. So it's not, you should definitely do this at this point, because the net benefit increases if you may need the money. But again, it's something that should definitely be part of a conversation with accountants and financial planners if you use them. So that's the tax relief on contributions. And then the estate planning opportunities. There are lots of quotes about estate planning and inheritance tax, and why it is, if you use the right planning, it is a bit of a voluntary tax, because there are things you can do to reduce it or entirely mitigate it. But this is one I quite like. But yeah, and one of those things is to use pensions, because any money held in a pension is under current legislation, albeit there are a couple of very, very small nuances, but broadly speaking, it is free from inheritance tax. So if someone has £500,000 in their pension, that's £500,000 that can pass on to their descendants, and there's absolutely no inheritance tax to pay on that. Now, if that money was not in a pension and it was in ISAs or property or standard investments, and they were already over the inheritance tax threshold, then they would have to pay £200,000 of inheritance tax on it, which is obviously quite high. If they'd left all that cash in the business, then, and this is one that I would defer to David on the exact numbers, but unless it was a very big business, sort of £500,000 of cash probably wouldn't qualify for business property relief and things if that business was passed on. And so, you can't just hoard cash in a company and hope that you can delay the inevitable down the line. So as I said, mostly speaking, pensions were passed to beneficiaries entirely free from tax. Any beneficiary who receives an inherited pension, they will pay tax on withdrawals at their marginal rate, unless the previous owner was under 75 on the date of death. And in that case, all withdrawals in the beneficiary's hands are entirely free from income tax. And as estate planning tools or succession planning tools go, pensions are very good, because that age 75 thing changes every time the current owner passes away. So if someone was over 75 when they died and they left their pension to a younger spouse, and then that younger spouse was unfortunate enough to die under the age of 75, the next people who inherit it, then becomes all tax-free. So there are, as I said, sort of, tax planning opportunities there, and it is hopefully, if people have funded their pension throughout their life, then it could be a very big pot of money that can be passed on to beneficiaries without anyone having to pay any inheritance tax. One thing to watch out for is that some older schemes, because these rules were changed in the last 6 years or so when George Osborne made some big changes to pensions and made them more flexible, and but not all schemes have updated the rules of their schemes, and so older schemes may not allow you to beneficiaries to inherit the pension. They may just pay it all out as a cash lump sum. Now, the beneficiaries may like that, but if that beneficiary is then unfortunate enough to pass away, then that lump sum will form part of their estate. Whereas if it was in a modern pension, it would just remain in the pension and it would remain free from inheritance tax. So yeah, so make sure that you check the details of your pension schemes, or engage with someone who can help you do that. Yeah, so this is just a little kind of, a little work through of what I was saying. So someone who's, in this case, 74, so they pass away, leave their SIP to their wife, she can take any money out of it and it's entirely free from tax. So she then sort of spends some of it and then passes £400,000 on. Now, because she's over 75 on death, that means that although it's still free from inheritance tax, the children who inherit it will pay income tax on any withdrawals. But they may not need it. They may wait until they're retired, which is what we want ideally with these situations. And then they pass it on to their children. And the same thing happens if they're over 75, withdrawals are taxed. But if they're not, then they would be free from income tax. And so, yeah, just to really sort of push it home, we've got two options here. And in the first one, you've got Mr. Brown, who has an old style pension scheme where they haven't rewritten the rules. But he decides actually what he wants to do is having spoken to his advisor, he realizes the benefit in moving to a more modern pension. And he passes away under the age of 75. And at the time of death, his pension's worth 600,000, and that goes to his wife. And she then unfortunately passes away quite soon after. She spent a bit of money, but she's then able to pass the balance of £550,000 onto their children. That gets split between them, and because their mother was under 75, they can take withdrawals from that free from any income tax, and they didn't pay any inheritance tax on the way. Now, in the other example, we have should come up in a sec. Yeah, so we have someone else who has an old style pension, and he didn't want to modernise it. There are maybe some fees involved in doing that, or he wasn't aware that it was something that could be done. And so, on his death, at the same age as Mr. Brown, he's got a little bit more in there because maybe the fees weren't so big, but his pension gets paid out to his wife all in one go. Now, there's no inheritance tax to pay because it's his wife, so she gets the full amount. However, she then again passes away 6 months later, and now that £570,000 gets reduced because we'll say the balance of her estate uses up all her available nil rate bands, and so her children only get £170,000 each. So as you can see, it's a big loss to the estate there, and that loss was entirely driven by the money being stuck in an older pension scheme rather than it having been switched to something that offered the flexibility available with modern pensions. And so as a quick kind of reminder, pensions very efficient for planning tools for succession planning. As I said, they're normally IHT free. There are only small caveats to that, and that's usually if someone makes a very large contribution that's out of the ordinary, and they die within 2 years, then it may be that contribution is subject to inheritance tax. Or if someone moves money from a good example is someone who moves money from a final salary pension scheme into a personal pension or a SIP, and then dies very soon after, as I said, classified as within 2 years, then that may be subject to inheritance tax. Although in that instance, the person would probably argue that if they died and it remained in the final salary pension, their descendants may have got nothing. So it was something worth doing, but just be aware that there can be IHT concerns. Income withdrawals from inherited pensions are potentially tax-free for the beneficiaries, depending on the age of death of the original owner. And so, what do you need to think about? Well, is your current pension modern? Does it have the flexibility that modern pensions offer, both in terms of how you access the money yourself and how it can pass on to your beneficiaries? That's determined by how the pension rules are written. So that's why we said, is it the right type of trust? And one other thing that's always good to do is to make sure that you've registered a nomination of beneficiary or beneficiaries with your pension provider. It's different than the will because it's pensions have freedom and flexibility to choose who they appoint as beneficiaries of a pension. But it's always good to nominate. All pension providers will have a form, and it's always good to make sure that you've completed one, just so that the people you want to receive the pension are there. And we always recommend maybe some additional wording along the lines of, I would like you to speak to all named beneficiaries before making any distributions, because sometimes a spouse may actually not need the pension and they may be happy for it to go directly to their children. And especially if they have the kind of liquidity to do that, they may say, well, the person who owns this pension died when they're under 75, I'm already over 75, I'm not going to need it, so I'd quite like a big bit to go to my children. And then if they want money now, they can get it free from income tax, as well as it kind of, passing tax efficiently. So it's always worth having a conversation with how those beneficiaries should be named. And then I believe the next slide is I must talk about the pullbacks, the drawbacks of investing in pensions, because it's not there are limitations. The first one is that you do pay tax on withdrawals. So as long as you don't pay more tax on the withdrawal than you were able to claim back on the contribution, then you should be ahead because of the tax-free element. However, if someone took out a big lump sum from their pension that made them, say, a higher rate or additional rate taxpayer, then they could end up paying more tax than they ever saved making the contribution. So you must be aware that the taxation should be considered at point of withdrawal. They are long-term investments, and by that I mean you cannot access them until you're at least 55. As I said, that's currently increases to 57 in a few years. Then if state pension age increases to 70, will pensions not be accessible until you're 60? Could that continue to rise? I think everyone's always concerned that state pension age is just going to keep getting higher and higher because the burden of paying it is so great. And then there are limits on how much you can pay into a pension, both annually and on the total amount that you can have in a pension. And as always, investments can go down as well as up. So just because you put £10,000 in there doesn't mean there'll be £10,000, immediately. It could well go down, especially as over the last couple of years we've seen a lot of volatility in the markets. So then I think I've just got a few slides to talk about. The annual allowance. So, and again, this is where any of you who are owner directors of your own companies, you have a kind of a slight advantage. So ordinarily, anyone can pay up to £40,000 per year into their pension, provided that they have £40,000 of qualifying earnings. Things that do not count as qualifying are dividends and rental income. So it has to be, salary. Anyone, even if they have no earnings, can pay £3,600 per year into a pension. That's always useful because people who are retired may not think that pension contributions are something they should be doing, but if they have other sources of income or other asset pools, then we still recommend pension contributions because they're inheritance tax planning tools. And if someone retires at 65 and they have 10 years of paying £3,600 in, that's £36,000 with no investment growth that's going to be free from inheritance tax. And also they've had £720 of tax relief every time, so they've had £7,200 of free money within that from the government. Any contributions over £40,000 don't qualify for tax relief, and there are some tapers for anyone who's fortunate enough to be earning over £240,000, where that £40,000 annual allowance reduces. But there is something called carry forward. So that hopefully we'll explain that on the next slide. So this is basically, if you've not paid into a pension for many years, but you've either got high earnings or you run your own business, then you can use previous unused contributions. So someone could pay in £40,000 for this year and then go back up to 3 years and pay whatever they had left from any contributions they'd made in those 3 years. So, as I said, someone who was earning at least £160,000, who'd had a pension but hadn't contributed to it for many years, if they happen to have £160,000 available to them, they could pay that into the pension all in 1 year, and there'd be no income tax to pay on any of it. And here's a little example. So in this case, we've got someone who paid £55,000 into a pension this year, and that is more than their annual allowance. So £15,000 of that would be not free from income tax. The previous 2 years, they maximised their contributions, but thankfully in 2019, 2020, they only paid £25,000 in. So that means that they can carry forward that unused allowance from 2019, 2020 into 22, 23, and therefore they will get full tax relief on the £55,000 contribution. So again, it's if you want to make a big contribution, and it could be that someone's had an inheritance and that's why they've suddenly got more money to be able to pay in, it's important that your advisors know what you've been paying into a pension over the last few years, because that will inform what can happen now. There's a lot of caveat, or not caveats, but a lot of nuances to this that we won't go into, but people who are in final salary schemes, doctors, have had issues with their annual contributions, with the way that their annual allowance was reduced because they were high earners. So if you're at all worried, then please get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to kind of look through and see where you are, and if there's anything, any planning that can be done on this front. And then after the carry forward one, and the other allowance that everyone needs to know about is the lifetime allowance, and there is a limit to the total size of your pension. It's currently just over £1 million. It was at one point 1.8 million when they first introduced the limit. That limit has been cut and cut and cut. It then started to increase again with CPI, but that's been capped from COVID times, because it's just a way of the government raising a bit more revenue by not increasing it. And if you exceed the lifetime allowance, anything over that £1,073,100 is effectively taxed at 55%. So if you believe you're close to that, and I define close, but I'd say anyone who's got over £750,000 in their pension should really be thinking about this. And that does include defined benefit or final salary schemes. So anyone who's vaguely close, it's better to act soon, because there are some ways that you can protect at a higher amount depending on your circumstances, but also there are just ways, that good and bad ways, that we can manage a pension, and the later you leave it, the fewer options you have to manage that lifetime allowance and try and not be taxed at 55% on too much of your excess. And then after the lifetime allowance, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so then that's hopefully a kind of a good, not too confusing, not too quick run through of pensions. But then we thought we should discuss the different insurances that might apply to people. So we've got standard life insurance that most people will be aware of, a tax-free lump sum in the event of death, typically people take this out to repay a mortgage, or for those who are more concerned, they maybe to just provide a lump sum on death. If anyone who's got a mortgage has hopefully got this in place, because most mortgage advisors will recommend it. It's the first port of call for, sort of when we're discussing financial planning. One thing to do is make sure that it's written in trust, because that way it means that it's outside your estate on death, and that's something that we should try and do if possible. Not always relevant to younger people, but as people get older and they accumulate more more assets, then it definitely makes sense. The next type of insurance, I'm not sure if I put critical illness next or yep. So critical illness, this is again a tax-free lump sum on the diagnosis of any of the covered illnesses. The lists of illnesses changes all the time, and not all critical illness policies are created equally, and older policies, because maybe there are fewer exclusions known at the time, tend to be more all-encompassing. But it's always worth checking, A, if you have cover, what that provides, and B, if you don't have cover, is it something that you might, you think is relevant? For most people, it is a degree of critical illness cover is important, because the chance of suffering a critical illness is considerably higher than the chance of dying, and it could prevent you from working. Your home may need alterations. There's a long list of reasons why it's important. It can be very expensive, so some people will just set a budget and say, I can pay £100 towards all my protection needs, and we then try and give them the best bang for their buck between life cover, critical illness, and then if we move on to the next slide, I think we've got income protection there. So income protection is maybe one of the most important ones after life cover, because whereas critical illness will only cover you if you are diagnosed with a particular illness, income protection will just replace your income if you're unable to work. And that could be because you're unwell, but it could also be because a dangerous driver knocked you over, or something happened that was entirely unrelated to becoming ill, and it will then pay you a salary effectively. It's also permanent. So if someone was incredibly unfortunate and was off work for an extended period of time on multiple occasions during their life, as long as they've paid the premiums, then they can draw and cover more than once. So it is always there, and that's beneficial. People will have a deferred period. So if you have a workplace scheme that will pay you for 6 months, then you would align this policy to start after 6 months, so that you know that you're not paying for more cover than you need, but that if you're still ill 6 months later, then this policy would kick in. And this is, as I said, is one that we very strongly recommend all people consider, because the chance of something happening and being off work is not insignificant, but the effect of it is dramatic especially if you're the main earner. And then I think now last one on the major protections is family income benefit, and this is just again similar to mortgage insurance, but rather than providing a lump sum, it provides a monthly tax repayment. And people use this because it's difficult to know how much lump sum you would need if anything happened to you, but most people know what their contribution is to the household expenses, and therefore that's quite an easy thing to say, okay, well, if I pay £4,000 a month towards everything, then if I disappear tomorrow, we'd need at least 4,000 or something close to that to replace the lost income, to make sure that the family is protected. And then actually the last couple, which are for those of you who are business owners, just shareholder protection, key person life insurance. So hopefully you've all got these. A lot of businesses don't know. Shareholder protection is really for the remaining shareholders if someone dies, and also the family of the deceased. It is just a life insurance policy that allows the family of the deceased to be bought out of their share by the business, and then there's normally a cross agreement with it that means that either party can exercise that right. So if the person who inherits the shares wants to sell them, then the business has to buy them, and if the business wants to buy them, then the person has to sell them. And that's a very, very important piece of cover, because if if I was a partner in a business or a limited company and I died, I don't think anyone would want my wife suddenly being a major shareholder and making decisions, and I know that she wouldn't want any sort of responsibility to do with that. So that's the key one. And then key person insurance, your business may have a value and it may be demonstrable what it does, but there may be a couple of people in there who are the main value of that business, and what happens to the business is something happens to them. So a lump sum to either replace the income that disappears on that person's illness, or a lump sum that enables you to go and hire a replacement for them, and that's also quite key, especially if you're the main person who is it's kind of responsible for running all of the business. Then your value to that business is probably quite great, and you should consider how that can be protected. And then relevant life policy is just a tax efficient way for business owners to hold some life policies in their own name. So hopefully that's not all been too quick, because I appreciate it was quite fast. But so what are the things to take away? Right, check your pensions, understand if they're older schemes, are you contributing to them? Maybe your business could make contributions if there's cash accruing and you haven't been paying much into a pension. If you don't have a pension, then start a pension. As I said, there's tax relief, inheritance tax planning benefits, and the ability to use carry forward is dependent on the fact that you have paid into a pension at some point in your life. So if you've never done that, then you don't have that ability to go back and use previous unused allowances, and it may not be relevant to you now, but at some point down the future it might be. And if you've never started a pension, you'll be thinking, I wish I had, because I'm missing a tax planning opportunity. And then think about life cover. Are you and your family adequately protected should anything happen to someone? Because there are different ways that we can address that, but you should at least have a conversation to understand what the costs are, so that if you're not going to do it, that you've ruled it out knowing all the answers, but hopefully that you will have the right protection in place. So thank you very much. And now, if anyone's got any questions, I'll do my best.
Right, well, questions are coming in from our audience aren't high, but let me just sort of recap a few points, if I may, Daniel. Because something I say to my team, I say to our clients, I say to everybody, because we're all unique and we all are in different seasons of our lives as we sort of transition from sort of being youngsters, and then we've got a family, and then family left home and that sort of thing. These areas are things we have to keep under review all the time, aren't they? And if and we have limited resources. So if somebody's got some money that they think, well, I want to be able to put money aside for pension planning, and I want to, but if I'm spending the money on pension planning, I can't spend the money on protection. And it's just about getting a right balance. Across those different risk requirements, if you like. You've got to make sure you can get to a pension. First of all, you've got to sort of look after your family until you are then able to draw a pension if you're the main earner. And it's just that balancing act, isn't it? Right the way through. So as we sort of transition through different seasons of our lives, these are conversations we need with our advisors on a regular basis, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. I'd say 99% of my clients are clients that I have an ongoing relationship with, and so yes, we if we were to engage with someone at age 35, the first conversations would be around protecting them and their family. And then if they have surplus income, what's the best way to utilize that? And then the balance shifts as people get older, as they get, it's kind of the business end for most people is when they hit 50 and they start thinking more seriously about when they want to retire and what that means, and then making sure that they're going to have adequate provision for that, through to then when people are retired and making sure that they're living, in retirement as they want to before inheritance tax planning comes up. So absolutely, there are conversations that we have with our clients on an annual basis, and it changes. Also circumstances will change and things happen that are not part of the original plan, and we have to react to that. But you're right, and it's making sure that you've got, you're using your capital and income wisely, so that we're building for the future, not completely ignoring the present, and then not going the other way, not saving so much for the future that people neglect, sort of their working life and live in misery because all they're doing is saving every penny into a pension. So,
I look across our client portfolio, and there have been instances where people said, well, I need the money now for mortgage payments, for family, for schooling or whatever, and they've said, I'm not interested in a pension. Then all of a sudden things have changed, and they think, I want to save some tax now. What's the best way for me to save a meaningful amount of tax? Well, I'd be thinking pension contributions, but they haven't in previous years actually set up a pension scheme or contributed to a pension scheme, and instantly there's only £40,000 that we can talk about, as opposed to, in that example, £160,000. It does make a difference. The other sort of little takeaway I got from this was just think about, even for people of retirement age, just thinking about that 3,600 that you could stick away every year, get a contribution for. You might not have pensionable income that will qualify for pension relief, but the 3,600 minimum, that de minimis, that you could just stick away every year. If you know that your children are going to be paying inheritance tax, if you do go from 65 to 85 before you pass away, you've just saved them a chunk of money if you don't need that 3,600 a year now.
Absolutely.
It's as well as making use of the annual gift reliefs and all that sort of stuff that we talk about, but that's nice. But sort of just thinking about a quite little investment pot is an attractive source as well.
Yeah, and the pension contribution's a good one, because whereas making annual gifts is great, that money is gone, and if you do need it, you can't access it. Whereas money that you pay into a pension, it is still your money. So someone's not giving up access to their own funds; they're just putting it in a more tax efficient shelter. And hopefully they don't need it. But and also on that, people can make pension contributions for grandchildren or children, and that's another way for people who truly have surplus, kind of capital or income. If they want to pass money on to grandchildren, they don't want them to have it to spend on anything silly and get the right to it when they're 18 or something. Those small contributions, if they're able, if you started a pension someone for 10-15 years when they were from very young age, compounding of growth, that would be a meaningful amount invested by the time they actually get to 60. That's a very nice thing for them to have. So you can use those allowances. Some people will use those allowances, or use that as a way to gift money to to descendants immediately.
Yeah, and we look after many owner managed businesses, and when there's stuff happens in businesses, and people do fall out, and particularly also when people pass away suddenly, those protection inside a company, those protection policies are really important. I'd always say, have a shareholders agreement, make sure you've got some protection policies to make sure you can the ongoing shareholders can deliver on the promises inside the shareholders agreement that says, we've got the right to buy at a sensible price. You've got the right to require that we buy at a sensible price and there's some funds to deal with it. But it is that's tends to be life insurance, doesn't it, as opposed to critical illness. So it's a bit cheaper. The critical illness is expensive, or can be expensive, depending on age and medical history. And with the bigger the policy, the more chance you're going to have some medical examinations first, aren't you, before an insurer will pick up on some of these things. But it's all about just trying to mitigate risk, and whilst sort of keeping your funds free, isn't it, as best you can, so you can then make those pension contributions or whatever.
Exactly.
But it's a balance. It's a balance, and because we're all unique and we've all got different circumstances, there's no one size fits all on any of this, is there really?
No, unfortunately not. There's no it's all what it all comes down to, I believe, in the way that we practice the provision advice is it's all lifetime financial planning. So someone's 50 and they want to retire at minimum by the age of 65, and so we try and establish how much they need in retirement, and then work backwards. So how much should you have in a pension now? How much are you able to save? There's a limited number of levers we can pull, but how much can you pay into it? How much risk are you prepared to take? When are you prepared to retire? And how much income you want in retirement are the kind of the main levers. And then if it leaves surplus income to fund other bits, then great. Or if they feel that we need to take care of the protection, maybe they've got a very large mortgage or something, and that's more important now. But still, how much do we need to save to give a quality, the right answer for when they get to retirement? And then just constantly review that. And and then all these things should get kind of picked up along the way.
Yeah, and we've got a number of clients who are doctors who are in the wonderful NHS final salary scheme, and there are some big issues around levels of contributions that have gone in, and the dynamisation or the indexation of their pension pots, and that £40,000 limit, which creates problems. But we've been working with our doctors to make sure that that we can cover the bases that we need to, make the elections we need to, and look for ways through some of the problems.
Yeah, the doctors one is very interesting, because that's one where everyone really is different, because some people will have, if they're older doctors who have been in the scheme a long time, then they may well have lifetime allowance issues and annual allowance issues. But then if you get the scheme to pay, it reduces the lifetime allowance. So they are very individual ones, but hopefully less important now that the cap has increased for when the annual allowance starts to reduce.
Yes,
it was quite
Okay, right. So just see, no more questions. So I'll say thank you very much, Daniel, for your time today. And the lovely thing we found with our merger is you guys can ask us some questions that come up on your clients on tax, and we've been able to, or we've been very fortunate to have Malcolm and Neil working with us over the years. But we know if Neil and Malcolm are unwell for any reason, we've got loads of people within MWA, including yourself, of course, that we can say, can you help us with this or with that? And that was the whole point of the combination. So thank you very much. And, any questions, give us a shout. We'll point you in the right direction. I think our contact details are on the next slide. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, yeah, thank you everyone. And yes, if you, as David said, if anyone needs anything, then you can have my email address and just drop me a line.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.